A German shepherd stepped out of a Montana blizzard, limping snow crusted along her sable coat. She rose on her hind legs as if pleading. Moments later, a former cavalryman, Colt Rivers, heard her broken bark and moved into the trees following the sound. In a frozen ravine beneath a shattered spruce, a German shepherd pup lay bleeding in the snow, while cruel snares glinted like knives under the pale light. One man, one mother, one fire-lit cabin, and a promise that no soul would be left in the cold. What came next would make anyone believe in quiet miracles and second chances. The winter dawn over Bozeman, Montana, crept slowly hesitant, as if even the sun feared the biting chill. The town rested at the foot of the bridge of range rooftops, buried beneath white drifts that shimmered faintly pink in the first streaks of light. Beyond narrow streets and huddled houses, mountains stretched vast and unyielding, their slopes thick with frost-glazed pines. Snow fell gently, not in sheets, but in persistent flecks that whispered across the landscape, blanketing everything in hush. It was a silence Colt Rivers knew like an old companion. At 42, the former cavalryman carried the quiet testimony of years spent in conflict zones etched into his frame. He stood 6 feet tall, lean and honed by discipline and survival. Once jet-black hair had given way to streaks of steel gray at the temples. His trimmed, coarse beard carried the salt of experience. Sun-darkened skin bore witness to long hours outdoors, but the sharp gray blue of his eyes told the truer story. A man who had witnessed too much, lost too much, and returned home carrying both weight and weariness. The cabin he'd chosen for life after service sat a mile beyond town, tucked at the edge of the forest. Built of rough-hewn timber and fieldstone, abandoned for years before he restored it with his own hands. A single chimney released a thin wisp of smoke that vanished almost immediately in the wind. Inside it was sparse, just a wood stove, a cot shelves lined with cans, and a rack of books weathered by war and rain. Solitude had been a deliberate choice. After years in battlefields and barracks, Colt desired only the trees and the steady rhythm of his own breathing. Yet routine remained his anchor. Each morning, he rose before dawn, donned his heavy wool coat and coyote brown boots, and walked the perimeter of the woods surrounding his cabin. He carried an old Springfield rifle, not to hunt, but to steady his hands. The soldier in him never died. He moved cautiously, scanning the tree line, listening for breaks in the stillness. Out here, winter could kill the careless as quickly as any enemy. That morning, snow fell heavier. Colt trudged a narrow deer trail, boots crunching in deliberate rhythm. His breath plumed before him in the frigid air. As always, his thoughts turned to his fallen comrades, men like Eli Kane and Jace Hart, who never returned from distant skirmishes, leaving families behind. Their ghosts followed him on these walks, unwelcome, but familiar. He spoke to them, sometimes murmurs carried away by the wind, as if they might answer. Then a sound broke the stillness, faint at first, nearly lost amid the crackle of snow on branches. A sharp, ragged bark cut through the hush. Colt froze, rifle-raised eyes narrowing. He waited. A second bark followed, hoarse, edged with desperation, carrying through the trees like a human plea rather than a warning. Instinct tightened his grip on the rifle. In Afghanistan, any cry in the silence meant danger. But here in Montana's winter woods, the bark carried a different urgency, threaded with a note Colt recognized not from battle, but from something far more human. fear for another. He adjusted his stance boots, sinking deeper into snow. His chest tightened not with dread, but with an inexplicable pull. Not a coyote, he muttered. He had spent enough time in the wild to know the difference. This was a dog large by the weight in her voice. The bark came again, closer, clearer through the snow-thick air. It was not the keening of a predator, nor the territorial growl of a feral stray. Broken hoarse, as though she had been calling too long. Urgency, yes, but also a plea that cut deeper. Colt Rivers remembered the canine units he'd worked with, overseas shepherds and Malinois dogs, whose loyalty outlasted even the men they served beside. He recalled dragging a wounded dog from a collapsed compound while its handler lay dead beside it. The dog had survived, eyes haunting him ever since. That same echo rang now in the desperate bark threading through the trees. He shifted the rifle to his shoulder, not ready to fire, but by habit, and began moving toward the sound. Steps quickened, breath sharp. The trail steepened. Snow deepened branches, snapped beneath boots, and once a crow burst upward from a tree in flurry of wings. Colt slowed at a small rise overlooking a frozen gulch. The barking had ceased, replaced by silence so complete he could hear his own blood rushing. Every nerve was taut as he scanned the white expanse below. Then from the shadows of the pines movement emerged. A German shepherd, large and lean, her coat a sable mix of black and tan, dusted with snow that clung like ash. Her ears pricked forward, yet her stance carried no hint of aggression. She rose on her hind legs, balancing awkwardly. 4 paws lifted not in threat, but closer to a plea. Colt Rivers blinked, unsure if the cold had tricked his eyes. The dog's deep amber eyes locked onto him with startling intensity. She wasn't merely signaling her presence, she was pleading. Her chest rose and fell in ragged rhythm, each breath exploding white into the frigid air. He lowered his rifle, stunned into stillness. For a heartbeat, time bent. He was back on the battlefield, a comrade clutching his sleeve eyes, desperate for rescue. But this was no Marine, it was Shadow asking with the same raw urgency. The dog emitted a low, guttural whine, then barked once more, shorter this time, before dropping to all fours. She took 2 steps forward, then paused, ears swiveling back as if checking he was following. Snow flew around her paws as she turned, trotted a few paces, then paused again, glancing over her shoulder. Colt's breath caught. There was intelligence here more than instinct. She wanted him to come. His fingers tightened on the rifle stock, though his mind whispered he wouldn't need it. Something deeper than training, deeper than fear, urged him onward. He had answered countless cries for help. Soldiers, civilians, broken hearts. This was no different, only voiced through another species. "All right," he murmured, voice barely audible against the wind. "Show me." Shadow's ears flicked, and she barked once more before slipping down the gulch, her dark form swallowed quickly by the curtain of falling snow. Colt set his jaw, tightened his coat strap, and followed. For the first time in months, perhaps years, his heart beat not from memory, not from ghosts, but from something alive and urgent, calling him back to service of compassion. The Montana wilderness shifted less like solitude, more like a summons. The forest deepened as Colt tracked the trail carved by Shadow. Snow thickened, clinging to branches of fir and pine until they bent under its weight. His boots sank ankle-deep at every step. The rifle bounced against his back. He moved with the careful, measured stride of a soldier, calculated, controlled, but something inside him softened as he followed Shadow's urgent movements. She halted suddenly in a clearing where pale light filtered through the canopy. She rose again onto her hind legs, front paws lifted as though in supplication, a gesture startlingly human. The sight, rooted him. She was lean but muscular, no more than 5 or 6 years old. A working dog's rugged beauty, long limbs, strong chest, sable coat, black down the spine, flaring into rich tan along sides and legs. Snow speckled her fur, glinting like shards of glass, and her amber eyes burned with a desperation that pierced the cold. Colt Rivers had seen soldiers beg for their lives, men weep for families, brothers in arms plead silently with eyes clouded by pain, but never an animal move with such raw, articulate urgency. It was as if she knew her only chance lay in making herself understood. He lowered the rifle, fully hands open, palms outward. His voice, rough from the cold, carried softly between them. "What are you trying to show me, girl?" Shadow barked sharply, then whined a sound somewhere between a cry and a command. She pivoted, took 3 paces into the trees, then looked back. The message was clear: follow. Colt's chest tightened. Instincts honed over decades told him not to ignore such a call, yet a thought flickered. What if it's a trap? Not set by the dog, of course, but by the wilderness, thin ice, sudden drops, or worse, men with cruel intent. Cruel. He shook his head, dismissing the notion. Signals he muttered under his breath, recalling his unit's saying, "You can read signs no one else sees." The twitch of a hand, the shift of a shadow, a pause in radio static. Now here was another signal. Fur and paw instead of flesh and bone, yet unmistakable. Shadow dropped back to all fours, gave another whine, and padded further into the trees. Colt adjusted his pack strap, drew a steadying breath, and followed. As they pressed deeper, he noticed her gait, a faint limp on her back right leg, a hitch betraying an old injury. A pale, hairless scar traced the inside of that leg. His mind flashed back nearly a year to spring when he had found a dog caught in a steel-jawed trap near the river flats. He had freed her, then cutting his palms raw. Could this be the same dog? The scar said yes. His throat tightened, unfamiliar emotion stirring beneath the armor of solitude. "You remember me," Colt Rivers whispered. Shadow barked once, almost as an answer, before charging forward again. The snow muffled every sound except their movement, but once or twice Colt thought he heard something else, a faint scratching, maybe a cry. His pulse quickened. Whatever had driven this shepherd to such human gestures could not be far. At last they arrived at a small hollow, where the trees opened like drawn curtains revealing a narrow gully. The air was sharper here, colder pooling in the basin. Shadow bounded to the edge, spun, and rose again onto her hind legs. She pawed at the air chest, heaving eyes fixed on Colt. He froze, every muscle taut. Her pleading pierced him through and through. It was not instinct, it was choice. A mother asking for help. Colt stepped forward, rifle bumping against his shoulder boots, crunching along the rim of the hollow. Shadow let out a small, broken howl, then dropped to all fours and scrambled down the incline. Colt's breath came short. He thought of battlefields of comrades whose signals were silent but legible if one looked closely. This dog carried a plea in her body, her voice, her stance. Though he could not yet see what lay ahead, he knew something in that hollow needed saving. Snow muted every step, as if the forest itself held its breath. Colt moved slowly down the slope after Shadow, his breath misting rhythmically. She did not bolt nor vanish into the shadows like a wild animal would. Instead, she paced a few strides ahead, paused, and turned her head back to ensure he followed. Their silent exchange, her glance, his nod, built understanding without words. When she stopped at the base of a frost-darkened pine, Colt noticed the faint hitch in her back right leg, a limp almost imperceptible but undeniable to trained eyes. She shifted her weight awkwardly against the snow. His gaze traveled down, and there it was, an old scar, pale against her sable fur, running in a crooked line along the inside of her leg. His chest tightened. He remembered the spring thaw nearly a year earlier, when he had found a shepherd caught in a rusted steel-jawed trap by the river flats north of Bozeman. Her cries had echoed through the timberline, a haunting mix of fury and terror. He had cut the trap open with a crowbar, shredding his palms raw. The dog had limped away, eyes wide and mistrustful. He had not expected to see her again. And yet here she was standing before him not in fear, but in recognition. The realization hit him with a rush that stole his breath. "You," he whispered, voice cracking against the frozen air. He took a slow step forward, lowering his rifle across his chest. The shepherd stiffened briefly, then relaxed, ears tilting back slightly as if she understood. Colt swallowed hard, emotion burning behind his eyes. "You're alive, and you came back." He had spoken to no one but ghosts and trees for weeks, yet now he found himself talking to a dog, as if she were a fellow cavalryman. "You remember me," he murmured again, softer this time, words escaping as confession more than speech. Shadow's amber eyes never left his face. She whined low, then padded a few steps forward before glancing back again. Her message was clear: there was no time for reunions. Something mattered more. Colt exhaled and followed. The trail led them deeper snow, gathering thicker between the trees. Here and there he glimpsed small forest creatures, hares, foxes, maybe even a lynx, but none fresh. What caught his attention was a thin line of human boot prints cutting awkwardly across the drifts. They were not his, nor recent enough to belong to any ranger he knew. Colt crouched, brushing snow aside. The edges of the tread blurred, but he estimated they had been left 2, maybe 3 days earlier. He frowned. Poachers. He had heard stories from locals venturing this far, men who set wire snares or steel traps caring little for law or cruelty. He had never confronted them directly, but knew enough to despise them. The scar on Shadow's leg was evidence enough. The thought stirred something bitter inside him. He pressed his gloved hand into the snow where the print lay, then rose shoulders tight beneath his coat. He followed Shadow onward, eyes scanning the undergrowth with sharper attention. Halfway along the gully, a voice startled him. "Rivers, is that you, Colt?" Fro's rifle half raised until recognition cut through. A tall, narrow figure emerged from behind a cedar, wrapped in a heavy green parka dusted with frost. It was Wade Boone, a local trapper-turned-handyman who occasionally brought supplies into Bozeman. Wade was in his early 60s, long-limbed, slightly stooped, with a face weathered by sun and wind. His beard was full, but unkempt, streaked white against deep brown. He carried a walking stick fashioned from elk antler and a canvas satchel slung across his shoulder. Wade raised his hand in greeting, pale eyes narrowing against the snow glare. "Didn't expect to see you out here this early." Trails rougher than usual. Colt eased the rifle back. He eased the rifle down, but kept his stance rigid. He knew Wade Boone as a man who talked too much, but never unkindly. Widowed 10 years prior, when his wife had died in a logging accident, Wade carried a loneliness that made him linger in conversation with anyone he met. "I was walking the line," Colt Rivers replied evenly, nodding toward Shadow. Wade's brow lifted. "That dog again, I heard you pulled one out of a trap last spring, figured she'd gone feral." "She remembers," Colt said quietly. Wade squinted at Shadow, who stood a short distance away, tail-high ears, alert but relaxed. "Doesn't look feral to me. Looks like she's got something on her mind." She wants you to follow." "Well then," Wade said, shifting his satchel, "best not keep a lady waiting." He gave a small, knowing smile, but Colt shook his head. "This isn't your road, Wade. Go back to town." Wade studied him, weathered face softening. He was a man who had buried more family than he had left, and he had learned to recognize when someone else carried a heavy burden. "Fair enough," he said at last. "But be careful. Those boot prints aren't mine. I saw 2 sets heading east yesterday, and they weren't wearing ranger badges." He tapped the side of his nose with a roughened finger, smelling faintly of snares. Colt gave a curt nod. "I'll watch my step." With that, Wade adjusted his parka and trudged away, disappearing into the thick snow and trees. Colt lingered, the warning heavy in his thoughts, before returning his gaze to Shadow. She had waited silently, as if she understood the stakes. "You're not letting me walk away from this, are you?" Colt said. The shepherd barked, once sharp and certain. He sighed and pressed on, following her, as the forest deepened and the light thinned. Shadow moved forward without hesitation. Every so often she slowed, glanced back, then continued her limping gait, steady and determined. Colt watched her words slipping from him unbidden. "Like a comrade, showing me the way." The memory of his unit tightened his throatmen who had once moved with him through deserts and mountains. Their gestures spoke louder than words. He remembered the nod before breaching a doorway, the glance meaning "cover me," the silence meaning "trust me." That same unspoken bond now pulsed between him and Shadow. She barked once more, disappearing over a snowbank. Colt quickened his pace, breath-harsh boots grinding deep into the drift. As he crested the rise, he saw her Paws below chest, heaving amber eyes, burning with a plea stronger than any voice. He whispered, "All right, I'll follow you," just like before. The dog whined softly, as if acknowledging his promise, and turned toward the unseen hollow ahead. The trail grew harsher as Colt pushed deeper into the mountainside, Shadow guiding him with tireless insistence. Snowflakes thickened, swirling like ash from an unseen fire. The wind funneled through the trees, low and mournful, the kind of sound that made a man believe the forest itself carried secrets. Colt tightened his grip on his rifle sling, but never wavered from the dog ahead. She limped, yes, but her pace remained steady, determination unbroken. Whatever lay ahead mattered to her more than the pain etched into her scarred leg. For nearly 30 minutes, they pressed onward the slope, pulling them downward into a narrow gulch. The walls of the ravine rose high and dark, layered with ice, where meltwater had frozen into crystal curtains. His boots slid on patches of packed snow, and more than once he had to grab a jutting root for balance. Shadow glanced back at him, breath-ragged eyes wide, as if to urge him faster. Then he heard it, a faint sound that might have been the whine of the wind, except it was sharper, trembling, achingly alive. A bark, weak, broken, forced from lungs too small to handle the cold. Colt froze, heart jolting. Shadow bolted down the last few yards of the incline, skidding to a stop beside a fallen spruce whose massive trunk lay snapped across the ravine floor. Snow piled deep around the tree, but beneath the shattered branches came the sound again. A pitiful cry followed by a whimper that tore straight through Colt's armor. He moved quickly, dropping to one knee in the snow, and there, pressed beneath the weight of the splintered tree, lay a German shepherd pup. No more than 5 or 6 months old, fur a lighter blend of tan and black, soft with the down of youth. One hind leg pinned awkwardly under a branch, blood stark against the white snow. The pup's sides heaved desperately with each shallow breath. The mother dog whined and circled frantically, pawing at the snow near the trunk, careful not to crush her pup further. She barked once at Colt, staring into his eyes with a plea so raw it felt human. His throat closed. He had seen soldiers pinned under rubble, trapped by collapsed walls, brothers screaming for someone to help. This was the same desperation, but now it came from a dog begging a stranger to save her child. "I see him," Colt whispered, voice rough with cold and emotion. He dropped his rifle aside and knelt lower, brushing snow away from the pup's trembling body. The pup whimpered, eyes glazed with pain, but flickering to life whenever Colt Rivers' hands touched the cold ground. Its ears were not fully upright, one flopping slightly, giving it an innocent, helpless look that made Colt's chest ache. He tested the weight of the branch, too heavy to lift bare-handed. He would need leverage. Quickly scanning the area, his eyes caught another piece of shattered timber a short distance away, thick enough to serve as a wedge. He seized it, jammed it under the trunk, and leaned with all his strength. Boots slid back, screamed, but the trunk shifted just enough for him to pull the pup free. The mother barked, sharply urgent, commanding him to hurry. She darted forward the moment her pup was clear, pressing her nose against its fur, licking frantically at the blood. Her body curled protectively around it, eyes never leaving Colt. He cradled the pup in his arms for a moment, feeling its trembling seep into his chest. "Easy, little one," he murmured. "You're safe now." He reached for the field kit strapped to his pack, a relic from his cavalry days that he never went without. He tore a strip of gauze, pressing it firmly against the pup's wound to slow the bleeding. As he worked, a new sound joined the wind, the crunch of boots on snow. Colt's head snapped up, muscles tensing. At the edge of the ravine stood a woman bundled in ranger green parka, trimmed with fur at the hood. She carried a satchel and a walking stick, cheeks reddened by cold. Her dark hair was pulled into a low braid. Colt Rivers, she called her voice, firm but cautious. Recognition hit him. It was May Whitlow, one of the regional park rangers. In her mid-30s, tall and lean, upright posture, suggesting both discipline and weariness. Her brown eyes, sharp yet compassionate, scanned the scene with trained efficiency. May had a reputation in Bozeman, respected for her dedication, quietly feared for her unwillingness to bend rules when wildlife safety was at stake. Years earlier, she'd survived an avalanche while leading a rescue patrol, leaving her with a permanent stiffness in one knee and a determination to prevent carelessness from harming others. "What are you doing out here?" May asked, sliding carefully down the slope. Her gaze landed on the blood, the pup, the mother hovering nearby. Her voice softened immediately. "Oh, God." Colt said nothing at first, hands steady on the pup's leg. Finally, he muttered, "She found me. Led me here." May crouched beside him, assessing with professional eyes, pup in shock. "You did the right thing stopping the bleeding. We need to get him warm and stable." She glanced at Shadow, who growled low, but made no move to attack. May's brows lifted. "She's trusting you. That doesn't happen often." "She remembers me," Colt said quietly. May's eyes flicked toward him, curious, but not prying. Instead, she pulled a thermal blanket from her satchel and laid it gently over the pup. "We'll need to carry him out." "Can you manage?" Colt nodded. He had carried wounded men heavier than this fragile little body. Still, the weight in his arms felt just as precious. Shadow pressed against his side, her body warm even through the cold gaze, unwavering. It was no longer suspicion. It was trust. She leaned close enough that Colt felt her breath on his arm, as if entrusting him with the life of her child. The pup whimpered softly, then settled, head pressed against his chest. He exhaled slowly, looking to May. "Let's move." The wind roared along the ravine, whistling between frozen stone walls. Colt knelt in the snow, Knee's numb gloved hands stained dark red as he worked. The pup lay trembling across his lap chest, rising in shallow bursts, fur around its hind leg matted with blood. Beside him, May Whitlow crouched, low eyes sharp with both training and concern, while Shadow hovered close, her breath steaming against his sleeve. Colt's field kit, weathered canvas from Helmand to Fallujah, spilled open across the snow. He had kept it stocked, even in retirement, as though expecting another emergency. His fingers found the familiar handle of a combat knife blade, worn but sharp. He cut away the fabric of an old bandage roll, fashioning strips to wrap tightly around the pup's wounded leg. Pressure first, he muttered, voice half for himself, half echoing memories of medics barking orders over the din of gunfire. He pressed the gauze into place, firm enough to slow the bleeding, gentle enough not to crush bone. Blood seeped quickly, staining his gloves dark, but his hands remained steady. May passed him a smaller strip of cloth from her satchel. Use this as a tie, hold it above the joint. He nodded, looping it swiftly, pulling the knot tight. The pup let out a weak cry, body jolting, but Colt murmured low, steady words. Easy, soldier, easy. The words came naturally. This was no different from crouching over a wounded cavalryman, urging him to hold on. Shadow circled, whining deep in her throat, nose darting toward her pup, then back to Colt Rivers. Her ears pricked forward, muscles taut, as if ready to spring at any moment, yet she did not attack, did not interfere. She watched him with the wary focus of a commander, placing trust in another. You've done this before, May Whitlow observed quietly. Her voice carried not curiosity, but respect. Colt didn't look up. Too many times. He adjusted the bandage, checked the pulse in the pup's small chest. His gloves slick with crimson breath shuddering in the cold. Day after day, different uniforms, same desperation. May's eyes softened for a moment. She had heard stories of Colt Rivers, the cavalryman who had returned home, but never fully came back to himself. She had seen men like him before, carved by war, living half in the present, half in the past. Yet watching him now, she recognized something else. The same resolve that had saved lives on battlefields was being poured into this trembling pup. The pup's whimpers quieted as the bleeding slowed ears, twitching eyes, flickering half open. Colt brushed snow gently from its muzzle. "You're tougher than you look," he said, voice roughened by both cold and emotion. Tremor in his own body made him shake as adrenaline ebbed. The wind knifed through his coat, sweat freezing against the nape of his neck, but his grip never faltered. The pup had found a pulse in him, he thought long gone, the need to protect at any cost. Shadow leaned forward, pressing her muzzle against Colt's wrist. A fleeting gesture, yet enough to startle him. He glanced at her eyes burning with fear and gratitude. For a heartbeat, he swore he saw recognition, as if she remembered the day he freed her from the steel trap. "Day before yesterday, I pulled a snare off a deer carcass," May said quietly, glancing toward the ridgeline. "Same handiwork, same bastards. This pup wouldn't have lasted the night if you hadn't come." Colt adjusted the bandage one last time and leaned back, exhaling slowly. He whispered almost to himself, "Back then I saved soldiers. Today, I save you." His words drifted into the white air, nearly lost in the howl of the wind. For a long moment, the three of them, man, ranger, and dog, sat huddled in the storm. Snow fell around them, erasing tracks, muffling sound, sealing their small circle from the rest of the world. Finally, May broke the silence. "We can't stay here. The pup needs warmth and fast. We'll get him back to your cabin." "Closer than the ranger station," Colt replied, pulling the pup closer to his chest. The small body radiated fragile heat, and he covered it with the thermal blanket May had given. He rose slowly, every muscle stiff, slinging his rifle back over his shoulder. Shadow pressed close as they began to move her flank, brushing his leg, tethering him to her trust. Colt glanced at her once more, corners of his mouth tightening in a grim smile. "You're watching me," he said, making sure he didn't let go. Though his body shook with cold, his stride was steady resolve no weaker than in the dust and fire of war. The storm had not let up by the time Colt, May, and Shadow began the slow climb out of the ravine. The pup, bound in gauze and wrapped in the thermal blanket, lay pressed against Colt's chest, trembling but alive. Every step sank into snow that had thickened since their descent. May followed just behind, staff carving lines in the drifts, sharp eyes scanning ahead. Colt's focus remained locked on the pup, its fragile breaths warm against his ribs. Yet the cavalryman in him, the part that never stopped scanning, caught a disturbance in the snow's rhythm. A dozen yards to the left, a boot print cut sharply into the powder. He slowed, crouched. May halted as well, leaning on her staff. "What is it?" He brushed aside the top layer of fresh flakes. Beneath lay a deep tread larger than his own, edges still firm, less than a day old. He traced it with gloved fingers, jaw tightening. Not his, not hers. Someone else had passed through here. May joined him, eyes narrowing. Too deep for hikers, too heavy for a lone man. She pointed further down the slope where a second trail crossed. Together they mapped a crude path, weaving between trees like hunters cutting lines through the wilderness. Colt, scanning higher up the ridge, spotted the first snare. A loop of wire, nearly invisible against the white anchored between two saplings. Its steel noose glinted faintly stiff with frost. Following the line with his eyes, he spotted another, then another arranged cruelly across a game trail that deer or elk might wander. His stomach turned. May muttered a curse under her breath, face tightening. "Poachers bold enough to work this close to town. I've pulled half a dozen traps this winter, but this is an operation." Memories surged sharp as shrapnel in Colt Rivers' mind. Dust of Kandahar alleys, of Fallujah paths booby-trapped for soldiers walking each day, they all came back in an instant. Nearly invisible until the moment of destruction. The difference between a war zone and Montana's forest shrank to nothing in that instant. Same cruelty, same cowardice, waiting for the innocent to step where they shouldn't. He shifted Scout in his arms, voice low and firm. "First priority is getting him out. Then I come back. Every last one of these traps comes out of the ground." May Whitlow gave him a side glance, measuring him. She saw the set of his jaw, the steel in his eyes, and recognized it. The look of a man who had decided and could not be turned. "I'll file the report," she said. "But if you're thinking of doing this alone, don't. Poachers out here, they don't like being crossed." Colt's lips pressed into a hard line. Neither did the Taliban. The wind shifted, scattering snow through the branches, but the silence between them held. May did not press further. She had seen enough to know some men carried weight too heavy to stop once set in motion. They resumed the climb. Shadow padded alongside Colt, occasionally darting forward to sniff the snow or backtrack toward Scout, but never straying far. Her eyes flicked constantly to the tree line, sensing hidden dangers. As they moved, Colt's thoughts darkened. He remembered Eli Kane, young corporal, who once joked about retiring to Montana, never making it home, because someone had left a bomb under the road. He remembered Jace Hart walking point through a narrow canyon, triggering a trap meant for all of them. The weight of those memories pressed hard as he looked at the crude snares glinting in the forest. Different place, different war, same disregard for life. At one point, Scout whimpered, shifting against his chest. Colt glanced down, softening. He loosened the blanket slightly to check the wound. The bleeding had slowed. The bandage remained firm gloves stiff with frozen blood. He stroked the pup's head gently. "Hang on, little guy." Shadow pressed closer, brushing his leg, eyes fixed on Scout. He met her gaze. "I'll get him back. You have my word." Promises broken before lingered in his mind, but this one, he vowed silently, would not be broken. Halfway back to higher ground, May paused, kneeling to examine another set of prints. "See this?" she said. The snow bore scuff marks of heavy crates dragged across it. "They're hauling gear, not just hunters passing through. This is a camp." Colt's pulse ticked faster. He pictured men setting snares with cold efficiency, laughing as animals strangled themselves. He imagined them nearby, perhaps watching even now. Grip tightened on the rifle strap. Then Scout whimpered again, weak and pitiful, and Colt forced himself to focus. Get the pup safe, then fight the battle. At last they crested the ridge, the forest opening revealing the faint outline of the trail back toward Colt's cabin. The storm had eased slightly, though the cold remained biting. Shadow barked once, short and urgent ears flicking back toward the ravine they had left. Her message was clear. She knew the threat, too. Colt shifted. Scout straightened his spine despite fatigue tugging at his limbs, and said aloud, as much to himself as the dog, "We'll finish this later, but first we keep him alive." May gave a single nod, braid dusted white with snow. Agreed. Cabin first. After that, they would make a plan. Together, they pressed on poachers' tracks at their backs, the fragile weight of life in Colt's arms, and the knowledge that the fight was far from over. By the time they broke free from the ravine and found the trail toward Colt's cabin, dusk had begun its slow descent. The sky above the bridge of range painted in bruised shades of violet and steel, temperature dropping with each passing minute. Snow crunched underfoot. Every breath a pale cloud clinging to their faces before carried away by the wind. Scout whimpered faintly, shifting weakly against the cocoon of the thermal blanket. Colt knew he couldn't carry the small body all the way through the drifts without risking collapse. His arms were already stiff from exertion, every muscle in his back screaming. He stopped beneath a stand of frozen birches, scanning the ground. "We need something to drag him," Colt said, voice hoarse. May's gaze followed his. "A sled would do it, but we don't have one." Colt's eyes landed on a downed branch, thick and sturdy. With quick efficiency, he cut and stripped it using his combat knife. He lashed cross pieces with cordage from his pack, fashioning a crude travois, the kind soldiers once built in deserts halfway around the world. He lined the frame with the blanket, then gently laid Scout across it. The pup whimpered once, then settled, ears twitching. May Whitlow tested the frame with her boot. "It'll hold." Her tone carried approval, though her eyes betrayed fatigue. She had been on patrol since dawn, the long trek taking its toll. Her old injury stiffened in the cold, her limp more pronounced. Colt Rivers noticed, but said nothing. Her pride would not allow pity. He gripped the harness of the makeshift sled and began to drag. The wood groaned but slid across the snow with surprising ease. Shadow fell into step beside him, flank brushing against the travois, as if guarding it. Each time Scout whimpered, her ears pricked, leaning closer to check for signs of pain. The journey stretched on a slow crawl through the lengthening night. Twice they stopped to rest. May handed Colt a flask of lukewarm tea from her satchel. He drank gratefully, the heat biting his tongue. They spoke little, exchanging brief words about direction and footing. Yet in that silence, a quiet camaraderie formed, not unlike the bond between soldiers in a foxhole. At last, the familiar silhouette of the cabin rose through the storm, a squat structure of timber and stone roof heavy with snow. Relief surged through Colt's chest. He pushed the travois, harder urgency driving him until the door was within reach. Inside, the air was frigid, but still. Colt lowered Scout gently near the hearth, then struck a match to the stacked wood. Flames leapt to life, crackling hungrily, spilling warmth into the single room. Shadows danced across the walls, illuminating shelves lined with tools and books, a rifle racked by the door, and a weathered map of Montana pinned above the desk. May moved quickly, fetching a small pot from a hook and filling it with snow to melt. Shadow paced near the cabinet first, restless, then settled at the door, lying across the threshold like a sentinel. Each time the wind howled through cracks, she lifted her head, ears sharp, returning her gaze to Colt. He removed Scout's bandage carefully, checking the wound in the firelight. The bleeding had slowed, though the flesh remained raw. He cleaned it with warm water, hands steady, despite fatigue making them tremble. He redressed the leg neatly, then offered Scout a shallow dish of water. The pup lapped weakly, spilling more than it drank, but even that effort was a victory. May crouched beside him, brown eyes softening as she watched. "You've done more for him in an hour than most vets could manage in a day." No, Colt shook his head. "Just kept him alive." His voice was low, almost ashamed. "That's all I ever did. Keep them breathing until morning." May's gaze lingered, studying the hard lines of his face, the scars along his knuckles, the haunted gray-blue of his eyes. She saw a man bound to ghosts, but tethered now to something new, a fragile pup, and the mother who trusted him. The fire warmed the room, thawing numbness from their limbs. Colt sat back against the wall, exhaustion heavy on his shoulders. Scout slept at last, tiny body curled beneath the blanket chest, rising in a slow, steady rhythm. Shadow remained at the door, but when Colt shifted, she looked at him with a gentleness that startled him. Amber eyes no longer burned with fear. They glowed with recognition. He whispered to her, voice rough, "You found the right man, didn't you?" The dog tilted her head, ears flicking, as if she understood. Then she lowered her head to her paws, content. Outside, the wind clawed at the cabin walls, rattling shutters, but inside the air was warm, alive with the scent of firewood and trust. For the first time in years, Colt felt his cabin was not just a shelter for one man. It was a place where hope had taken root. Morning arrived, slow and tender, a pink blush spreading across the snowbound peaks of the Bridge of Range. The storm had broken overnight, leaving the air clear and crisp. The world washed clean, as if the mountain itself drew a deep breath. The first shafts of sunlight pierced the frosted windows of Colt's cabin, laying golden stripes across the wooden floor. Colt stirred from a light sleep in his chair by the fire. Body-stiff boots still on from the night before. He had refused the cot, choosing, instead, to stay close to the hearth where Scout lay bundled. The little shepherd shifted ears, twitching at the crackle of the flames. For the first time, its eyes opened fully, clearer, brighter, carrying the fragile resilience of life. Shadow was already awake. She had not closed her eyes for more than a minute at a time. Coiled at the door like a sentinel, she rose when she saw her pup stir, padding soundlessly across the room. She nudged gently at Scout, coaxing him to rise. Colt leaned forward, every muscle tense with anticipation. The pup whimpered, pressed its front paws against the blanket, wobbling and trembling, struggling upright. For a heartbeat, it swayed, uncertain. Then Scout took a halting step forward, then another. Its injured leg bore weight gingerly, but it held. A slow smile spread across Colt Rivers' face, rare and unpracticed after so many years of silence. He exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "That's it," he murmured. "On your feet, little soldier." Shadow licked her pup's muzzle, amber eyes alight with fierce pride. She glanced at Colt once, and though no words passed between them, the message was clear. "You made this possible." From the far side of the cabin, May Whitlow stretched braid loose around her shoulders, her ranger parka draped over a chair. She had stayed the night as well, refusing to leave while the pup's fate remained uncertain. Her brown eyes softened at the sight. "He's stronger than I thought," she said quietly. Colt nodded, gaze still fixed on the pup. "Stronger than most men I've known." His voice carried not just certainty, but conviction. They fed the pup small sips of warm broth coaxed from dried meat May carried in her pack. It ate tentatively, then curled briefly against Shadow's flank before trying again to stand. Each attempt steadied it more, soon moving in small, uneven circles, testing its strength, while the firelight painted its fur with copper tones. Colt rose and walked to the door, opening it slowly, letting early light flood in. Outside, the snow sparkled like glass, unbroken except for their trail from the night before. The cold rushed in, but with it came a freshness that felt like renewal. The pup limped toward the doorway, guided gently by its mother. Together they stepped into the snow. The pup staggered once, nearly tumbling, but Shadow nudged it with her nose, steadying it. Side by side, they crossed the threshold into morning. Colt stood in the doorway watching. Something shifted inside him, an ache, long numb, stirring again. For years he had told himself he was finished, a soldier without a war, a man without a family. But here was proof. Life continued, trust endured even in the most fragile form. Shadow paused, turning her head back toward him. Their eyes locked, and in that deep amber gaze was gratitude no language could hold. She did not need to bark or whine. The silence itself spoke volumes. Colt's throat tightened. He forced a smile, rare and honest. "You don't owe me anything," he said softly. "But thank you for reminding me." The mother dog held his gaze a moment longer, then moved on her pup, limping at her side. They disappeared into the trees, snow swallowing their tracks until only sunlight remained. May stepped beside Colt, pulling her coat tighter. "They'll be back," she said. Colt glanced at her, one brow raised. "You gave them a reason," she added simply. Her voice carried no doubt only quiet certainty born from years of watching wild things return to places of safety. He looked once more at the tree line, then shut the door gently. The cabin felt warmer now, less empty. He sat again by the fire, and for the first time in many winters, his lips curved into something close to peace. Later that week, as he chopped wood by the cabin, he heard the sound again, the familiar bark. He turned, and there they were. Shadow standing tall in the snow, Scout bounding clumsily at her side, still limping but stronger. They approached not with desperation this time, but with the calm ease of neighbors returning home. From then on, the two dogs came often. Sometimes they slept by the fire, sometimes lingered by the door, but always stayed close. They were no longer just visitors. They were part of the cabin, part of Colt's life, as though fate had given him a family he never thought he deserved. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, painting the mountains in fire, Colt sat with May on the porch, the two dogs resting at their feet. Scout gnawed clumsily on a stick, Shadow watching with calm pride. Colt whispered almost to himself, "You've taught me something I forgot. That kindness is never wasted, never forgotten." The dogs didn't stir, but their presence was answer enough. And in that moment, Colt Rivers knew the war inside him had begun to quiet, replaced by the steady rhythm of trust, hope, and a new beginning born in the snow. In the end, what Colt discovered was not only the survival of a pup or the trust of its mother, but the quiet reminder that miracles still walk among us. Sometimes they arrive not with thunder or lightning, but in the soft plea of a wounded animal, in the warmth of a shared fire, or in the strength to carry on when the night feels endless. For those with eyes to see, these moments are gifts whispering that compassion is never wasted and hope is never gone. Just as Colt opened his cabin to two lost creatures, we too are called each day to open our hearts in our homes, our families, our communities. Our acts of kindness, no matter how small, ripple outward, becoming modern miracles in a world that desperately needs them. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who may need reminding that hope still exists. Comment below with your thoughts. Tell us where you are watching from, and let your voice join this community of light. If you believe God still works wonders through love, through trust, and through second chances, type Amen in the comments. Together, let us hope that He blesses every viewer here with peace, strength, and protection. And if you want to hear more stories of loyalty, courage, and the miracles that walk beside us, please subscribe to this channel. Let us continue this journey together, carrying hope into every corner of our lives.